You're listening to the Road to Wisdom podcast, weaving stories told by wonderful minds about all things motherhood, health, intimacy, politics, nature, and everything in between.
Join us on an adventure discovering unique experiences that we can learn from to enhance the ways in which we live.
We are your hosts, Chloe
and Keshia.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's so exciting that we could work out a time to speak to you. We are just thrilled to have you here today. So for everyone listening, we have Lael Stone on the podcast. Now, I'm going to do a little introduction because I think a lot of our viewers actually know who you are. But I wanted to do a little introduction of how I came to know you, Lael, which you don't know the story. But when I had my second child, he, pretty much from birth, screamed. He screamed and he screamed. And after our first child, who was like the unicorn child, and me and my husband were like, we're good at this. We should just have another one straight away. To have a baby that didn't stop screaming was a new thing for us. So then I was introduced, after, I looked at him like, it's not a tongue tie. It's absolutely not colic. And that's what I was told over and over again. And I found Aware Parenting. I stumbled upon it and I basically was soothed by the sweet voice of Lael Stone and Marion Rose from there on out. And yeah, I feel like it was a really beautiful lesson for us to have because it was the first introduction into emotional intelligence for us. And yeah, it really helped us as parents, not just with my son, but then with my daughter, who we never let cry and didn't realize until we came across your work. And so it's really exciting to have you on today. It's such an honor. And we, between us, have 8 children, so we're very excited to get some more pointers.
Wow, 8 children is a lot of children. I take my hat off to you. I'm very impressed. Amazing.
Thank you.
Amazing that we could coordinate to actually get together to speak. I think that's probably the amazing part, isn't it?
It's impressive, isn't it? Because you have 3 children yourself.
Yeah, I do, but they're adults now, or one's 15, but their others are adults. So that's I'm in a completely different phase now, which is beautiful. So I get to just do what I want most of the time, which is really lovely. But when you've got younger kids and you're navigating life, it's really tricky. It's really, really tricky.
Yeah, for sure. We'd love to hear just a little bit in your words about your work and about how it came to be that you kind of discovered this work and how important it is. And, for a lot of us, we weren't modeled this type of parenting as children, and we're kind of coming full circle. I think a lot of us are, having children and then, being faced with a lot of triggers, a lot of, we want to do things differently. So your work is particularly just big for a lot of people lately. So, yeah, we'd love to hear in your words.
Thank you. Well, I think it started many, many years ago working in birth. So my background was as a childbirth educator and a doula, and I was attending birth. So this is probably about 18, 19 years ago. And I kept seeing trauma in birth, which we see a lot of. And, so I started working a lot with families that had really traumatic birth experiences. And I'd had 2 kids at that time by the time I started working in birth. And by the time I had my 3rd baby and I had this whole idea of, this birth experience I was going to have, she had a completely different idea. And I ended up in hospital with a really highly interventionist birth and a cesarean for an undiagnosed breech baby. And just a whole journey unfolded. And she was born really, really unwell and wasn't expected to live. And I found myself, as a person who'd worked in birth, attended hundreds of births and worked with trauma all the time, I found myself in that exact situation thinking, whoa, what is this about here for me? And it was one one of the greatest gifts I think I have ever received, having to navigate that with my third baby. It was a really challenging experience, and not one I'd wish upon anyone, but boy, did it open up a whole portal for me around really what trauma is and how to heal from trauma from my perspective as a mother, but also as for a baby. And so that's how I kind of came across Aletha Salter's work. I read her book, The Aware Baby, when my daughter was just a month or two old, and realized, gosh, there is so much here in parenting that I'm missing. And there was so much that I'd been doing with my older two kids about just shutting down their feelings and wanting to be a deeply attached parent, so I was really attached and attuned to them, but I just did not know what to do with big feelings. And I don't think I had a deeper understanding really of how we hold trauma in our bodies as kids and all that kind of stuff. So I started working with those concepts, that Aletha Salter's concept of aware parenting, and began to see the incredible change and shift in my baby from the trauma that she'd experienced. And then that, I think, pushed me into really unpacking a whole lot of my own trauma. And I did spend a good year doing nothing but looking at my trauma and my story. And I couldn't work. I was really just functioning as a mum. That was kind of it. But I really saw the power of having to strip back everything to really do the work on all my own parts of the younger parts of me that held stories and all those belief systems and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of combined with my birth work and then aware parenting, I became an aware parenting instructor. And I really felt like I spent about 10 years just practicing on my kids. Like I feel like they were like my test cases.
I think we all are.
Yeah. So I'd read stuff or do things, and then I'd like watch it play out, or I'd try a certain play thing, or I'd hold space for feelings, and I just watch and observe. It was really incredible actually to witness it and watch it through a therapist lens, but also as a parent and having to do my own work. And then as my kids got older, my son moved into the teenage years, and all of a sudden I started to go, oh God, have I taught him enough about, sex and sexuality and intimacy and relationships? And I kind of stumbled across becoming a teaching sex ed to teenagers. So that was a random thing. But I then spent about 5 years in secondary schools teaching pleasure-based sex education, combining kind of my work with birth, but really helping teens to navigate their bodies and also understand this whole complex thing around sex and sexuality and intimacy and all those kind of things. So that was a pretty incredible job to work with teens for a long time. And then after that, I was still working with families at the time. The opportunity came up to build my own school with a wonderful client of mine who I'd been working with for years, and she was really disheartened with the schooling system and really wanted to build or create something for her children that was really based on a lot of the philosophies that I'd been teaching her and working with her. And that was pretty huge because I'm not a classic educator. I don't even really like school. Don't even really like education. I have my own hang-ups. Yeah. And so here was this opportunity to actually build something that could make a difference. And it absolutely terrified me because I was like, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. And but I don't know, one day I remember just having this real epiphany of like, well, it just takes one person to create change, and why not me? Why not me, coming through this lens of trauma informed and emotional awareness? What if I could create something new that really holds the whole child and allows children to thrive and be seen, and all the things that we know are missing from our system, but also that we could implement and create something new. So that took about 3 years of my life, building Woodline Primary. It was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done.
I've heard nothing but the most incredible things about this school, and I wish we were all able to
attend it.
Yes, chuck our kids on a little train and send them there every day to Geelong. Anyway.
Yeah. Look, it's beautiful. I mean, we're in our third year now, so we still have so much learning and growth to do. But already, what we see from what we're doing with the kids is absolutely extraordinary. It blows me away. Actually, it's way better than what I ever dreamed it could be, which is a pretty beautiful place to sit in. So that I did that, and I had the Aware Parenting podcast with Marion for many years, which is, as you talked about, how you first heard about us, which was just such a blessing, and then that helped us then write a book. We kind of took everything we talked about there and released our first book last year. And these days, I don't work as much one-on-one with parents, but I do a lot of public speaking around Australia, talking about emotional awareness. I do a lot of talks in schools for educators now around a whole different way of education. And I'm writing a second book at the moment as well, and just waiting to see where it all unfolds. And actually, probably more than anything, I'm doing quite a bit of consulting with others that want to build similar systems in schools and stuff like that. So it's nice to be able to take everything that I've learned and messed up with and go, hey, don't do this, do that, and see how you go here. And as I said, my kids are pretty big now. They're 23, nearly 20, and 15. So I'm not having to do that intense, heavy load of mothering anymore. I get to just hang out with some really cool adults. They're pretty awesome. Having adult kids is the best. It's so fun. I love it. It's
We're
really
a little while off that, aren't we?
Our youngest is both one.
Yeah. And our
I don't want to hear
eldest,
about any of that.
our eldest's 7, so we're in it. I think that would lead us to our first question, because one of the things that I really loved and appreciate about you, Lael, is how honest you are about your own mistakes and where you felt that you could have been better. Because I know that I can fall into habits where I turn around and look at myself in the aftermath of it and I'm like, oh, I'm just my mum. I'm doing the same shit. So what I really appreciated was when you did talk about the things that you did that weren't perfect and how you can rectify that. And I think that would lead us into...
I think just, like, we are not perfect parents, but we'd like to aim for perfect in a way. And many times we'll, and I think you're the same. I've been with you many times in moments, and you've been with me in moments where we've both probably been like, oh my God, that's not really what we'd want to be doing. Like, especially things like rewards, like it's my go-to. And I'm like, if you do this, then we can do this. It's like, if you do that, I'll get this. Or, there's so much. There's yelling. My go-to is yelling because, that's all I ever got as a child is, yelling. Mm-hmm. And so I guess something that I always think of is, am I ruining my child? Straight up. If I've yelled at my child for 5 consecutive days and I'm really I'm unregulated, I can't get it together, I think, oh my God, it's in the first 7 years, I've really done some damage here. Like, am I going to be able to make this okay? Can I be better? Can I go back?
How do we repair those situations, I think?
Yeah. So I firstly just want to give you a big hug and go, it's really normal, and go, we're all doing the best job we know how. And I think it's really important to remember when you're trying to parent in a way that's different to the way you were raised, it takes lots of practice, it takes lots of compassion, and it takes lots of time to sometimes undo some of those patterns. So I know, and this is most parents, we come in with the best intention, which is, I want to do it this way. And then when we are stretched, when we haven't had enough time to ourselves, when we haven't eaten, when our own wounds get triggered, we just default to those places. And I know, but nobody wants to do it. But the first piece always is real compassion for ourselves, is to remember, I'm doing the best job I know how in these moments. And I think, you highlight a beautiful piece there. We will so often default to being our parents, which is what we don't want to do. And when we're looking at this, how do I repair it with my child? For me, the absolute first place has got to be the compassion with yourself. So if we have behaved in a way with our kids that we didn't like, right? I mean, the first thing I always go is, well, can we in that moment pause and just go, what's happening here for me? Right. So if you can in those moments pause and go, oh God, I haven't eaten since 8 o'clock, or I really actually need a break, I'm at capacity, or, I'm just feeling depleted, or gosh, that really reminds me of my younger brother. There's something here to work with. If we can start by just bringing some awareness to how we are, we then begin to start changing some of those stories and patterns. So we start to just identify, yep, I just lost it. That wasn't ideal, but what's happening for me in this moment? Okay. And what would compassion look like right now? Well, compassion would look like me actually maybe putting my hand on my heart, taking a deep breath and go, yeah, this feels a bit crap, but what can I do in this next moment moving forward? What compassion isn't is when we just go, God, I'm a terrible mum, and God, I shouldn't have done that. And we just start then beating ourselves up for, not responding in the way that we wanted to. Because when we are looking at repair and when we're looking at how we help mold our kids, if we are sitting heavily in judgment of ourselves, that is what they're going to pick up. So if we can see it as an opportunity, because there is no perfect, and it doesn't matter who you are, there's going to be a time where you're going to lose it at your kids. I have completely lost it at my kids over the years. It's in those moments where we actually start to change the patterning and conditioning from judgment and shame to compassion and growing. And so when we can, in those first moments of actually just identify, yeah, I messed up, I'm going to choose compassion right now. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to have a glass of water. I'm going to do something to actually bring myself back to my center. And then I'll look at what I need to do to repair with my kids. Already you have shifted a dynamic then. Already you've changed something. And then we come back to, okay, what do we need to do for our kiddos in those moments? So, to keep it really simple, it always comes back to connection. Are we connected or are we not? And so if you are yelling at your kids, then odds are you're not connected, right? You're probably not connected to yourself and you're not connected to them. So what do we need to do to get connected? Well, perhaps firstly, I need to just go and wash my hands in the bathroom and just cool down. Or maybe I need to go put my feet on the earth for a little bit. Or maybe I need to feed myself. What do I need to do in that moment to bring myself back to my center so that I can be present? And then we go to our kids and we actually just say, I am really sorry for how I responded in that way. That was about me. That's all about mummy. And I am learning and I am really going to try and do better next time. And I really want to repair with you. What would repair look like for you? Now, depending on the age of your kids, your 7-year-old might go, well, I just want to play with you for 15 minutes, play Lego. And you'd be like, okay, let's do that. Or, the 5-year-old just might want to cuddle. And the 1-year-old will probably just look at you. 1-year-olds are very forgiving. So, they'll
Thank
just
God.
want to cuddle.
Just boob. Thanks.
Yeah. So I think the thing is, the key piece about repair, and I think this is really important to understand about children, is children naturally want to be connected to us. They're actually very naturally forgiving. If we are beating ourselves up, then that's the energy they're going to carry forward. If we can move into compassion and just go, hey, I'm learning and I'm doing the best job I know how, it creates more forgiveness for them as well in their being and their energy field to actually feel, hey, I can lean into this. So I think it's really important to remember it is never too late to repair. Like, I didn't come to this parenting till my oldest was 8. And so I'd done a lot of yelling and I've done a lot of shutting down, a lot of distracting from feelings. And when I first kind of leaned into this, I remember thinking, oh my God, there's a whole lot here we have to undo. But I kept sitting in trust. I kept sitting in a place of, I am so willing for this to be healed. I am so willing for our relationship to be healed, or for whatever he needs to bring to the story. I'm here and I'm listening. And over the years, he did in really different ways. And, now he's this beautiful 23-year-old man who I just absolutely adore. And we have the most beautiful relationship. And I think so much of it came from just being willing to sit in the vulnerable stuff, to own my story, to say sorry, and to trust his journey that he would bring the healing when he's ready. And he did. And I think that's a big piece of us as parents. We just want to rush in and fix it. And I'm so sorry. And is it okay? Are you okay? Do you still love me? Like, are we going to be all right? Instead of actually just being able to, okay, honey, if there's something here for you, then odds are you'll bring it in the next little bit. And I'm just going to meet it when it arrives.
Yeah.
I think that really just the fixing thing, I've heard you speak on it before, and it's really easy to go there as a parent, especially of multiples. I feel like a lot of the parenting advice doesn't really factor in multiple children because just to paint a picture, and I'd love some, exploration here, is, I have 4 kids and my 3rd child will constantly push over my baby or constantly walk up to my 2 eldest in the middle of their games and smash their thing to smithereens.
Yeah, Rosie.
She will say, I hate you. And I know that she's excluded and I know that she's feeling like, but when she's done it 40 times before 7 a.m, I'm like, how would I, I'll try to get down to her level. Try to figure it out. But sometimes she'll just look at me like I'm a joke. And I'm like, well, what do I do other than try to be like, well, what works, and I'll be honest, is like, we'll go to the cafe, maybe we'll get like a hot chocolate or something. And she's like, cool. And then it might stop for 20 minutes. And maybe she'll be even worse after the hot chocolate. And in those moments, I'm like, what do I do?
Yeah. Yeah. How old is she?
She's 3. She'll turn 4 in November.
Sorry.
Yeah,
And also
okay.
I laugh because I feel like you're just describing Rue, my third. So
And it's not
same age.
Yeah, it's the same age thing, but I feel like it's happened since, my baby was born. So I have it as a level of awareness of what she might be going through as a 3-year-old, as a sibling, as a child who, she doesn't connect with my 2 oldest as much because they're best mates.
Yeah.
And she doesn't really connect with my youngest because he's a baby.
Yeah.
And, I've spoken to a lot of other parents about this too, where one of their kids has this, recurring behavior, like constantly hitting, and you're trying to figure it out and you're trying to not be triggered by that. In those moments, where do we go?
Yeah, it's really big. Well, firstly, I just want to really honor and acknowledge that's really hard to hold. When you've got 4 kids and you're trying to meet their needs, and that's all happening, as you say, before 7 a.m. There is no doubt that you are going to be like, how do I shut this down? How do I control this? And I absolutely understand that every part of you is just like, I need to get a handle on this. And so there's 2 parts that I would look into this. The first is what is happening for you in those moments, which we'll lean into in a minute. But the second part is, okay, what is this beautiful little spirit in front of me telling me? Well, she's telling me that she's feeling pretty powerless because she's using force, she's hitting, she's punching, she's biting, she's destroying things. There's a hold of powerlessness sitting in her body. And so how do we help her feel powerful again? And so a few different ways we'd lean into that. One is, well, firstly, I'd be like, how much is she releasing or crying the stresses from her body? So it might be that, she's not having the opportunity to let out, why did you have another baby? Like, I was your baby and then you had another one. Or perhaps she's like, I'm not included with the big kids. Now, we're not expecting a 3-year-old to voice this, but we can presume as a 3-year-old who's perhaps third in line, there's going to be some feelings there, which is really normal. And it's part of, the big journey of her life. But also most 3-year-olds feel powerless because, they can't do the things that others can do and they're told what to do all day. So it's very normal for me to see a 3-year-old who has big feelings, or is what we're seeing in the behavior is that kind of aggression. And whenever there is aggression, there's powerlessness, and there's what's needing is for her to move some of this stuff through her body. So if we come back to looking at children as actually beautiful, unique, gorgeous little humans that are actually enough, perfect the way they are, then we're not going to look at her through the lens of she's wrong and she's bad. We're going to look at her through the lens of, she's just trying to tell me something here. And, I often say to parents whenever I'm working with them around their kids, if you were her for a minute, like if you were just your beautiful 3-year-old little one and you kind of tuned into her body for a second, and then I asked you, what do you think's happening for her in those moments? What do you get? What feeling do you get?
I've done that before and I feel for her. I really feel for her.
Yeah.
But then I
So
also
the
feel
thing,
for me.
yeah. Okay, so
Yeah.
here's the beautiful spot. No, this is perfect, right?
Mhm.
You're feeling for her because in that moment you're like, oh, okay, I actually sense what it feels like to be this little 3-year-old in this dynamic, and it feels really big. Okay. And that's beautiful. And that's really beautiful to be attuned to, because that's going to allow you to meet her with more empathy and compassion. So that's really, really vital. The second piece that you said, which I think is equally as important, is I feel for myself here. And this is the piece I think that we can work with, which is what's happening for me in this moment right now. And so, if we lean into you for a second and go, all right, well, what are the thoughts that go through your head when she is coming in and destroying the other games and she's pushing the baby over? What's the narrative that goes through your head? What are you feeling in those moments?
It's more like, well, I'll be honest. It's like, well, how can I make her happy? Which is, can I force my 2 older kids to play with her?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that doesn't work.
No, of
So,
course it doesn't. Yeah. Yeah. And so what I would say in this moment, I know we're kind of getting into a bit of therapy here, and I apologize.
yeah.
No, please therapy us. We
I
need
think
therapy.
we need you on speed dial, actually, if we could do that.
But what I want to kind of bring up here is that whenever there's something going on with a child, we've always got both elements. We've got what's happening for the child here, and we've also got what's happening for the parent. And I think we can't look at one without the other. And so because you are the one that's going to be holding the space, for this, we have to lean into the stories that you've got going on in that moment, which is, how do I keep her happy? Do I try and convince the other kids to play with her? And perhaps the themes that are sitting underneath that are maybe some powerlessness for you. Maybe there's a really common theme of a story in your life about just keeping everyone happy all the time and then it will be all right. Like, without digging deeper, I have no doubt that there will be some story there for you around something that's very familiar in your journey, whether that's from your upbringing, your family dynamic, or even at how were you when you were 3? What was going on in your world in those moments? And sometimes what's happening is that is being reflected back to you by your beautiful 3-year-old, because what she's doing is like, hey, mama, I need you to move some of these pieces that you might be carrying so that you can be more spacious for me, which means that you are able to meet her with more of a presence, with more boundaries, with more anchoredness. That's like, honey, that's a no, and she has a big rage and you can hold it for her. Or you're able to find some other times to deeply connect with her, that actually meet her needs for some connection and attachment, that actually means then she doesn't have to power over the others. So, there's I would probably have to ask you more questions to kind of get deeper
No, I
into what
think you've
is
done a
going
really
on.
good job of touching on it, and I'm doing all the talking here, but I just was going to take it to the discipline thing. I feel like there's a big confusion with discipline, with aware parenting, and a lot of people will be like, it looks like doing nothing versus
Yeah.
what is, because,
Holding those
yeah, I feel like
boundaries.
holding boundaries and discipline is obviously incredibly important, and that's what children want. But it can feel tricky because what was modeled to us would be like, go to your room, stop crying, you should
Yeah.
be seen and not heard.
Yeah.
All the things that we've probably all heard and are familiar with. But for us, it's like, well, am I really just going to get down to their level every time they've thrown a car at the sibling's head and they're crying?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
I totally do. And I know that this is something that comes up for a lot of parents. And so I think to give it some context, or to be able to look at, and one of the things I say to parents all the time, all right, let's imagine that you're 3, right? And you've walked into the room and you're full of big feelings already. You started the day that way and you see your two brothers, brother and sister playing happily, and it feels unfair for you, and you go over and you knock that game over, and then you see the baby and you've got feelings around the baby because, you were the youngest and now you're not. And you go into something there, like in that beautiful moment of your 3-year-old self, you are just, I am trying to move the feelings I've got going on here. Now, let's just imagine we are that 3-year-old feeling that frustration. I mean, really, we could be that 3-year-old as an adult. Most of us are 3-year-olds in adult bodies, actually. That's the reality. Uh, so imagine we're feeling like that. And then the person that you want to please, and the person that loves you the most, and the person that you're most attached to for survival comes in and yells at you and screams at you and then takes something away from you. What is that feeling like in your beautiful 3-year-old body? Well, we move into more feelings in that emotional backpack. We move into more stories of, I'm not understood, people don't get me, I'm disconnected. When your beautiful 3-year-old's just like, can someone please help me move these feelings that are stirring in my body because I've got a lot going on? And it's not something we sit down and explain to her, because at 3, it's not a cognitive explanation. It's how do we move the feelings that sit through her body? And we do that through crying, through raging. We can do it through laughing. We can do it through moving our bodies in certain ways. And so what I'm getting to is that if, when we come down hard on children who are misbehaving or doing behavior that doesn't feel good, then often what we're doing is adding more stress and more trauma to their story. And so, I think this is really important to remember. We've grown up in a behaviorism paradigm, which means most of us are indoctrinated with this story that in order to get someone to do better, we must make them feel worse. So, I'm going to punish you, take something away from you, and then you will do better. But I really beg to argue that, because actually, when we do something like that, what we're actually doing is we are creating more shame for that person. And it becomes not a story of, I've done something wrong. It becomes, I am wrong. Or not, I've done something bad, but I am bad. And then that's when we have a whole deeper story that goes on around, I'm not good enough, nobody understands me. And then that's where we carry that deprecating feeling going on. So what do we do when our kids are acting up? Well, the first thing we really need to be aware of is always looking behind the behavior and going, why? What is the why here? What am I seeing from this beautiful little person in front of me as to what's happening in these moments? Well, if I can look at it through that lens of compassion, what I'm saying is here's a 3-year-old who's pretty out of balance, right? Who's got some big feelings they're needing to offload. Perhaps they need some one-on-one time. Perhaps they need a limit to push up against so they can have a big cry and move the stress and the stuff that's sitting in their bodies and their feelings. Perhaps there's some more guidance, or, and perhaps I need to find my center more, because perhaps I'm just not even present or connected. And then they're kind of calling me back into my body. That's a big thing that happens too, is often kids can be acting out. And as parents, we're like, oh, far out, this feels too big. And so we're not even there. We're not even present. So then the children are like, are you hearing me? Like, where are you? I'm going to get even louder now. So then they do even more extreme things, because they're calling you into, can you see me here in these moments, right? So what we'd be looking at here is, if we move into punishment, and discipline actually means to teach, right? It doesn't mean to punish, but I think we grew up with this whole idea of, I need to punish you, take something away from you to make you feel better. All we're often doing in that moment is creating more stress. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't set limits and boundaries. Like, you absolutely come in and you say, I'm not willing for you to hurt your brother, and you grab whatever they've got, and I'm going to be with you, and you hold a bit of a container for them to move those feelings. Like, children will often look for a boundary to push up against so they can move the feelings that are in their body, so they do come back into balance. So then when we can meet that, if we need to, if we can hold the feelings so that they come back into balance, only when a child is back into balance, then we would have a conversation where we'd say something like, sweetheart, did you want to play with your brother and sister and they're not playing with you? I can see that. Well, how can we find a way to do that moving forward? Or, sweetheart, I know you don't really want to hurt your brother and push him over, and it's not okay to use your body in that way. So let's find other things that we can push over and move all those feelings in our bodies in big ways. Let's put on some music and do some angry dancing. Let's go outside and break sticks. Let's go and push things over. Like, let's find another expression for what the body needs to do. So I think the thing is, and I really do hear how challenging this is for parents when we don't feel supported in our home, or when we're completely stretched. What I'm asking you to do in saying that requires a level of connectedness and centeredness for us to do it. But when we're exhausted and we're stretched and we haven't had enough sleep, it's very, very difficult to do. And
Lael.
so the default is to power over.
So I just wanted to add an extra layer onto this, because this is a situation that I think we have a few friends who have more than 3 children. So it would be a situation that we see a lot. And it often happens when you're trying to do the morning run and you've got maybe a crying baby on your hip while you're packing lunches, and then there's the situation of the 3-year-old, or my 5-year-old can also cause a little bit of havoc. So if we're in that moment where it's like, actually, we need to get in the car, I'm already 20 minutes late, like go, which is usually when they need to express those feelings, when they need to be held, and you're just like, I haven't got time to hold you right now.
Yes, I hear you. It's not easy. And I wish I could say, just do 1, 2, 3 magic and then it'll be fine. It's not like that. And in those moments, sometimes we're just like, there was times with that where my kids were there and I'd be like, well, I'm just going to do whatever works in this moment, which is, hey, do you want a lollipop? Great, have a lollipop, right? Sometimes we
Feels
do
like that.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we're like, hey, there's a bigger picture here. We need to get somewhere. Look, if we didn't have to be places on time, then, this would be a whole different scenario. We could slow down, we could pause, we could connect more, we could listen to those feelings. But there's times where we have to be and do stuff, and then that feels really tricky. And so I really love to, just put it out there. There's no perfect within this, right? We are all doing the best job we know how. Some days we're resourced enough to be present and hold it, and some days we are not. And I think the thing is, on the days we are not, then we just want to make sure that we come back and connect in again, hours later or the next day, whatever, to say, hey, I know I gave you that yesterday because, you had a lot of big feelings, but I'm here to connect with you now. And how can we help these feelings come out? And a lot of the time I found with my kids, it was about maintenance. It was about just trying to find moments in each day where I could connect with my kids one-on-one, where if I saw that there was a boundary that needed to be pushed up against, I would hold space for feelings with it. I'd say to my husband, you need to take care of the others because this one's got some big feelings and I'm just going to do that. It actually required me to slow down a whole lot more so I could be present. I mean, when I first really started listening to my kids' feelings, I remember thinking, this is like a full-time job, just like meeting myself enough so that I can meet whatever's going on for them. And in the beginning it kind of was, because there was a big backlog of feelings there for them. But after about 6 months or so of doing it and really just making sure that I was being as present as possible, and it really was about my presence that changed it, then what happened is there started to be less feelings, and my kids were able to then walk in and go, I'm angry, can you help me? Or mama, I'm sad, I need a cuddle. They weren't acting it out in behavior. They were able to actually articulate how they were feeling. And that's when I started to go, oh my God, this is powerful, because children will often act out what's going on because they don't yet have the words to express how they're feeling, or they don't know how to, or it doesn't feel safe to. So they're going to use their behaviors to act out. But when we actually start modeling this beautiful emotional awareness, when we listen to their feelings, when we give words, then they're able to develop the ability to walk in and go, this is what I need. And that made parenting a whole lot easier, because it wasn't so much about putting out these fires all the time, but it was about how do we do this maintenance so that we can meet their needs so that it can actually get easier. And I really want to flag for both of you, like having 4 kids under 7, like you guys are in the trenches. Like this is the hardest work. Like, please hear me. I have so much compassion for you, because like, you just flat chat getting through the days. A lot of people, right? Especially if we don't have the supports that we need, it's full on. And when you want to do it differently, that's also big. Like you're parenting yourself as you're parenting these little kiddos.
And our
So
partners.
it's huge.
Just
And
for the record.
I really want to flag that this is really intense, and it does get easier, right? And so sometimes you're just like, I'm just getting through the day. And what does that look like, right?
Yeah.
And if we have 10 minutes of play and laughter, that's a win, right? And then if one child through that week has a really big meltdown and I'm able to hold it, that's amazing, right? That is awesome. So please be gentle and compassionate with yourself. I think, I always come back to this, is in order to parent in this way, we have to look after our own needs. That has to be the priority, because we cannot turn up and be present and connected and do all this kind of stuff if we're disconnected and depleted from ourselves. So, the massive changing point for me when I started doing this with my family is I had rubbish self-care and terrible boundaries. That all had to change, because I was like, if I am going to be this anchor point for my family, then I've got to take care of my needs. And that became a non-negotiable. That actually shifted a whole lot, because I had a greater capacity to meet their feelings. I was more present and attuned to them. So I could often feel what was going on before it actually eventuated. So I could actually move in with some playfulness or connection, or hold a limit before it needed to, eventuate in someone throwing a shoe at someone's head. Like I was able to be more present with it, because I was actually meeting my needs. And that was a huge game changer as well.
Lael, can we go into, because I know that we are short for time today, but I would really, really love to go into boundaries and limits. I want to preface that as we live in an area where freedom is a big priority. We're in the Northern Rivers, and you see it in a lot of families. Unschooling is a huge thing, and often trying to find the balance, I guess, between the, coming down too hard, or looking like you're coming down too hard. I mean, I've got 2 boys who are nearly 6 and nearly 4. They're very physical beings. And so when it comes to holding a limit, sometimes that means me actually physically removing them from a situation, which from the outside I could imagine looks pretty rough. So I guess there's like that end of the scale, and then there's the dropping all limits and boundaries so that your child has the freedom. So if you could talk to that a little bit, that would be great.
Yeah. Well, I think to kind of simplify it, on one hand, with boundaries, I think the way most of us were brought up was with this authoritarian bent, and what we saw boundaries is yelling, this is what's happening, and that's final, right? And we weren't allowed to push back, we weren't allowed to say anything. And that, I think, is what we see as, yes, well done, you let them know who's boss, right? But of course that doesn't feel good for us, because we feel powered over, we feel not listened to. Most of us are pushing back against that, because we're like, how dare you speak to me that way, right?
I find
Then
that
we
with my
swing to the
children.
Yeah. Then we speak to the other side, which is permissive, which is really about, oh, no boundaries, no limit. I just want to keep you happy all the time, right? Now, children actually need to meet us somewhere in the middle. They actually do need boundaries because, again, if we look at a buildup of feelings in their body, which all children are going to have, they will often look for ways to discharge those feelings. Now, if they are, remotely imbalanced, then they'll discharge those feelings through play or running around or laughing or being silly, or they'll come and have a big cry and they'll, de-stress their body so they come back into balance. But not all children know how to do that. And sometimes that's not what's going on. So they look for places to push up against so they can have a limit so that they're able to offload those feelings. So Marianne, my co-host from the Aware Parenting podcast, used to say, and I love this expression, we can say no to the behavior, but yes to the feelings, which means that if, one of your kids is going up and hitting somebody else with a car, right, we can actually go over, and it's really important that we go over and we get down on their level and we be really just anchored and calm and say, I'm not willing for you to hurt someone. It's not okay. I'm going to pick you up and I'm going to move you somewhere else. Now, that is, if we can do that from a place where we are calm, where our heart is open, we're saying no to something, but then we are allowed, or we are welcoming whatever your child feels about that. Your child's then allowed to protest, I want to hit him with the car and that's not fair. He took my thing. And what we do is we again look behind the behavior and understand that in that moment, what's happening is my child's got a massive backpack full of feelings and they're looking for an opportunity to offload that. And here's the opportunity. And what they need is our help to set an anchored limit. Now, I often explain setting boundaries as to imagine yourself like a tree and you are deeply rooted in the earth. So you are like an old oak tree. You are anchored and grounded and your heart is open and your leaves can sway and bend. So we have flexibility, but we are clear and anchored, and children will feel this. If you come in too hot with a boundary, yelling and screaming, it means you're out of balance and you actually need to take some time to calm yourself, to come back to your center, right? Because in that moment when you set a boundary where you are yelling and screaming and hot, what it becomes about for the child is the disconnection with you, not so much what's going on. When we set a boundary that's really wishy-washy, we change our mind, I don't know, just can you be nice, please, darling, and we're pleading, the child feels like, well, no one's actually got this here. This feels a bit unsafe for me. So they'll often push harder and harder until we get that limit. Whereas when we can come in with this anchored boundary where we are calm and anchored, it says to the child, I've got this. This is not too big for me. And I can see there's something else going on for you. And I'm not willing for you to hurt someone. And I'm here to guide you within that. And you can also tell me how you feel about it. And again, I really invite people to think about, imagine if you were the child, how would that feel for you? If an adult comes in and yells at, screaming at you, what's that going to feel like? If it's really permissive, what's that going to feel like? What would it be like when we were having a really hard time, when we had a whole lot of feelings brewing in our body and an adult came in, they were attuned to us, they set a limit, they were kind and loving as they did it, but they were firm. Well, that would bring a safety that allows them whatever we've been sitting with to come pouring out, which helps me come back into balance. And that is not about powering over. That is about, hey, I am here to guide you, which is actually what all children need. It's really, really important because I find when there is not boundaries, then often what happens is these kids will keep pushing to find where the edges and the limit are. And they often become quite entitled and they become really kind of not so nice to be around either because, it's all about their needs. It all becomes about what's going on in their world. And then they're not able to tune in with others. And so limits are really, really, really important. But the way we set them is vital.
Can I take a moment here to then also talk about allowing our young children to make big decisions? Because I find that that's something that I grapple with a little bit. For instance, when it comes to school, if my kids go to a Steiner school up here, and I've never allowed them to just take the day off unless they're unwell or unless I think there's been maybe I could count it on 3 fingers, but I do have friends who are like, I just can't get my kid to go to school. And I wonder about allowing our children to make these big decisions and how that would feed into the safety aspect and how they feel held by us if they're making more adult decisions.
Yeah. Well, I think it depends again on the age of the child and who your child is. So, my big question with that, if a child doesn't want to go to school, would be like, okay, so what's happening for the child? Is it that there's kids that are being mean to them at school, it doesn't feel good? Is it that they're bored? Is it that there's a big story around separation and it feels really hard saying goodbye to mum and dad, and that feels really big? Is it the child is actually using this as a way to kind of go to the parent, hey, can you set a limit for me? Because I need to know where the edge sits, and particularly if parents have got big stories for themselves around boundaries and limits, and they felt massively overpowered, we can often swing too far in the other direction where we're like, oh, I don't want ever my child to feel controlled, I just want them to be able to do whatever they want, and that's actually our own wounding there. And so then our kids will actually push up against stuff that perhaps doesn't serve them. And school is not for everybody. I'm a big advocate of doing what feels right for your child. I am so well aware of our system and how broken it is, and there are absolutely legitimate times where children are just like, why on earth am I going? There's no point to this. What am I learning? And I totally get that. But I think again, sometimes we have to look a bit deeper. What are the layers that are sitting there? What are the stories around that? So in a situation where your child, I think there can be times where we tune into our kids and go, you know what, actually they just want a day to hang with me, and that could be really beautiful. That could 100% fill up their cup and helps them feel really, got their needs met, and then they're really cruisy in the family, and that feels good. That's absolutely a possibility. I think we always have to challenge, what are the thoughts going on here? So in that sense, is there a story for you that says, no, you must go to school every day because that's how you will be successful? I'm just throwing it out there, not saying that's what you're doing. Or maybe it's that, no, but I pay this money, you got to go. Or no, it's like, or what will people think if you're not there? Or maybe it's just like, no way, man, I need you to go to school, so because it's too stressful having everyone at home.
Can I interject? For me, it's more about overcoming something, like knowing you can do something even when you you don't want to, or like you're feeling
Persevere.
Perseverance. And
Okay.
I was brought up like that.
So beautiful. You can identify. You can be like, oh, that was a big theme in my family. You push through no matter what, right? You got to have some grit, right?
I think it was more just like, if you can overcome this as a challenge, the next challenge that comes your way, you can actually do it. And that was more so sorry.
A positive. It sounds like it's a positive thing.
That is a beautiful lesson, and that is a beautiful piece. And sometimes that'll play out in school. Sometimes it'll play out joining the basketball team. Sometimes it'll play out like that is going to play out no matter what in children's lives. And again, I think it's really important that we take a moment to tune back into, well, what is my story here around this? What do I want for my kids? Is there any wounding in me around this that I'm then pushing too hard, or I'm too relaxed in one way? I think they're really beautiful things to be curious about. Well, what is the value here? Because again, I come back to children when they feel balanced, when they feel excited about something, when they feel passionate, they will jump in 110%, want to do it no matter what, right? And so that's often a big problem in our schooling system because it doesn't meet the needs of those kids. So I think it is a delicate dance of like, well, what's going on here for my child in our family unit? What is my story within this? I don't think there's any right or wrong within it. I think it's about feeling into, well, what is going to serve them, and what are my values around this as well.
Yeah.
I know we're about to wrap up here, and I'd really just love to, something that we didn't discuss before, but as a family unit, like we're really passionate about making it work with our partners, where we've been potentially, possibly modeled, like a broken family structure, and not really seeing mum and dad do it right together and support each other. So I'd love to just hear ways or tools, maybe practical ways, where mum can support dad or dad can support mum in holding this space, and what success might look like when dad gets home from work or mum gets home from work, and the parents being at it, like, and is at 100, and just instead of the dad being like, oh, how hard can it be? Like, you just get to hang out with your kids all day.
Yeah.
Talk to us about what success could look like there. And
so I think, and it's such a beautiful question, because I think it's one that comes up a lot, and I think it is all about actually, let's be a team. Let's not compete. So, you know, in the early days, my husband and I used to play the game Who's Doing It Tougher, which was, you know, I'm at home with the kids all day. Yeah, well, I'm at work all day trying to earn the money. And I'm like, but you get to go to the toilet by yourself and you get to go for coffee. And he's like,
Oh,
yeah,
I'm
but you
really
don't
good at this
have to
game.
deal with clients. And just like, oh my God. And we just competed all the time. And then we competed about who would have more time off. And we'd like, it was not good, because all we were doing is both coming from a place of, I'm not getting my needs met and you're not getting your needs met. And we are fighting each other here. And then, of course, our kids are like, oh, that doesn't feel good. And so then they were reflecting that back in their behavior. It was just a shit show. So I think it was really important that we got to a place where we're like, actually, what would compassion look like? What would being a team look like here? And how do we all get our needs met? So when we moved from that whole kind of taking score of each other to actually taking care, then what actually happened is we began to go, what do you need, darling? And what do you need? And we actually lent into how could we support each other in the bigger picture. Now, sometimes that was outsourcing and getting extra support. Sometimes it's ringing a friend going, can you have my kids for a few hours because, you know, I'm at capacity. And it was being able to sit down together and go, well, what does our week look like and what do you need? And I'm like, well, I need to have a few hours by myself. And he's like, I need to go play football. I need to do this. I need to do that. Awesome. Where can we factor this in, and how can we gift it to each other generously? Because when we change the energy from competition into, I want you to feel good, then it actually came back tenfold. And actually, we were more tender with each other. And our kids kind of all went, this feels better. It feels better, parents getting
That
along here.
beautiful energy.
And so I think the thing is, it takes just one person in the relationship to call it, right? So that when we're in the competing and we're in that, we just need one of us to go, this doesn't feel good. What would it look like if love was here? What would it look like if compassion was here in this moment? It would look like, honey, you are working so hard and I really get the pressure of what you're doing. And, you know, I want to support you. And it would also be the same. Now, for me, in the young years of having kids, there was this underlying simmering resentment all the time, because I would look at my husband and go, you have no idea what it's like being at home with 3 kids all day and breastfeeding and doing this and doing that. And of course he didn't know, because it wasn't his job, right? And so I was just constantly looking for him to validate the job I was doing and seeing where I was at with it. And it never came, you know, because he was in his own world going, you don't know how hard it is trying to support the family. And so really what we had to do is actually get very real with each other and go, we are both working full time here and we are both doing an epic, massive job. And what do we need to make this family unit feel good? And so it became about boundaries, self-care, meeting each other's needs. And it moved from that competing to actually, I'd be like, babe, you look like you're feeling really stressed. What do you need? So that it changed in the sense he would come home from work and the first thing he'd do is walk in, he'd see me, give me a hug, and he'd go, what do you need? And I'd be like, I just need to get in the bath. And he'd be like, awesome. And so straight away, we'd just move into, the kids are yours, you do this. Or I'd be like, nah, I'm pretty good. I'm like, do you need to do something? He's like, yeah, maybe I'll go do this for 20 minutes. Okay, cool. So we just kind of started to you know, connect each other on a bit of a score of where we're at, where's capacity. Like if I'm at a 10, which means I've got nothing left, I'd be like, I'm a 9, and he'd be like, right, cool, I'll take over. And if he was a 9, we'd both be like, all right, how do we get through this?
We're
next
screwed.
but at least we will do it together, right? Like, I'm hearing you, baby, I'm seeing you. It's looking through the eyes of tenderness and compassion for our beautiful partners, as opposed to competition. And I think especially when we're not meeting our own needs and we have a story around self-care and we have a story around boundaries, we are often going to look through a lens that is about, it's not fair, you don't see me, not enough, all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of layers, I think, to explore within it that begin to shift and change the dynamic. And I've been with my husband for like 25 years now. It's such a long time. I've been with him longer than I've been by part, right? And we've been through all these years of raising kids and all the kind of stuff. And we both even say now, one of the biggest game changers was doing our own work, but meeting each other with tenderness, not as a competition, but as partners and as a team. And that shifted everything, you know, because then it wasn't about who's getting more or less. It was really about how do we work this as a beautiful whole.
Oh, amazing. I think that's a beautiful
You
note.
are a big warm hug, Lael. And can we do this again another day?
Yes, please. Can we? I
There's
feel
more to talk about. Well, I'll come back for part 2. We'll do another one.
that would be
Yes,
amazing.
please.
This
There's
has
so
been
much
really
to
good.
unpack, and I feel like we're just at this time in where we just all are really desiring change and desiring to show up different to our kids, and realizing that it's actually the kids that are going to be the big difference in the world. And so we really value this information and really love
And value
your message.
Where can our listeners find you, Lael?
So you can find me at laelstone.com.au. There's no other Lael Stones in the world at the moment, according to Google. So that's pretty cool for me. So if you Google Lael Stone, all my stuff turns up. I've got courses on my website. You can buy our book online, and I'm on social media at Lael Stone. So all my bits and pieces are there as well.
Excellent. And also I will link to the TED Talk that you did that's got like 1.5 million views on YouTube because
You're amazing.
that is phenomenal. And I love that that's there. I can just check in with it when I feel like
it's a quick 15-minute recap.
Yeah, exactly.
It's good, and I think I do have people often say, I just go and check in and listen to certain bits and pieces, because I think it's like learning a new language. Parenting this way is like learning a new language, and we have to practice it, and we have to hear it again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
And I think that's why podcasts are so brilliant. You can go back and listen to them, and things like that are really beneficial to be able to just come back to what we want to do and what we want to be. And I think we have to hear it many times as we begin to change it, because it's not how we were raised. And it's massive doing what you guys are doing, of wanting to raise your kids consciously, and you've got lots of little people at home, and it's a huge task. And I absolutely take my hat off to you to being willing to go, let's do it differently, because it's not easy. But I tell you, it is so worth it. These years that you're working through now where you're like, oh my God, this is full on. Is this ever going to end? I remember the relentlessness of it, of like, is this my life forever? I want you to know it's not going to be. It is going to change, right? But it is in those moments actually just keeping on coming back to, how do I meet myself so that I can turn up for these people? And if you can keep coming back to that lens of doing it that way, you're going to do a beautiful job, and you're going to be doing the work, and these incredible, gorgeous kiddies that are lucky enough to have you as their mamas are going to be extraordinary humans that the world needs. So keep going, keep doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lael. You're an angel.
Thanks so much for having me.
We'll see you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Road to Wisdom podcast. To join the journey, you can follow us on Instagram at theroadtowisdom.podcast and at www.theroadtowisdompodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. We look forward to seeing you next week with more juicy content.